We have a lot to explore on this topic of sales tech enablement, strategies for deploying video, direct mail, automation, whatever it is you're doing to empower yourself or your reps. How do you help folks be truly productive? How do you help them get the value out of the strategies, the methodologies, and the technologies you're rolling out? We've got an amazing panel session here to talk about that.
Some of my core responsibilities are creating our sales playbooks and go-to-market playbooks, working super close with the product and marketing side. Of course, implementing our sales tech stack, a big passion of mine. And then, it's really interesting because what's kind of evolved from just being purely sales enablement is now kind of all encompassing and starting to become revenue enablement with my role supporting CS as well in the customer success capacity.
Awesome. Absolutely. Lauren, Kevin?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Alex. I think the role is definitely expanding. Ours has as well. So I think, we all say sales enablement, but it truly is becoming more revenue enablement. We are responsible for sales, SDRs, and CS. So it really kind of covers that entire customer lifecycle, which is a great thing because you want to make sure that your message, your pitch, the way you talk about your product and how your entire sales process and methodology flows through the entire life cycle and really creates one cohesive experience for your customers and prospects. So our first and primary two tools as enablement are HighSpot and Gong. So HighSpot is, the central place to store and find and share content, and Gong is a really critical piece of our kind of reinforcement and a skill assessment strategy. But that said, in terms of tech enablement, like our teams are using a ton of different tools as well. So we have like Groove, we have Outreach, 6th Sense, LinkedIn Navigator. We're a Salesforce company. And so those are the Gong and HighSpot is what I use in enablement, but our role is to enable our team on all the tech that they use. So it's definitely a big tech stack across the board, but I think there's a lot of good in there.
Awesome. Alex, Kevin, would love to hear from you all too.
Yeah, so our core tech stack is ZoomInfo, Discover Org. More sales ops is managing that, but like you said, Lauren, it really is something that enablement needs to be across to help people know how to use the tools effectively. Outreach is one of the core tools. Vidyard, of course. HighSpot, one of the tools that we recently implemented, so definitely in the same boat there. Prezi, Brainshark, and then most recently Gong, which we're rolling out in just a couple of weeks. So really excited for that. And Sendoso is on our wish list.
Nice.
I mean, yeah, I think if you think about the buckets, right, of like what most teams need, you need a data source, you need a process tool, right, like a SalesLoft and Outreach. I believe you need a coaching tool, like a Gong, ExecVision, Chorus, Wingman. Calendaring tool like a Chili Piper. I use Chili Piper. I'm also a big believer in direct mail. I was actually on a call with Sendoso earlier today, so put in a good word for me, Lauren. As like the foundational things that every team needs to have in place, right? And I think holding it back to even the original question, what's very interesting is now enablement has to be experts at those things. Because it's gone are the days where it's just like, all right, you can hand it off to the team and that's it. Like enablement now actually has to be expert in the tools. And that wasn't always the case. Enablement oftentimes was focused on the messaging, on some of the content. And now it's like, hey, we're rolling out Outreach across 150 reps. Enablement, what says you? That's a totally different ballgame now, right? And so I think that's a shift that's starting to happen too, is enablement starting to, I think, understand the sales process more and sales process better so they actually can enable with all the tools. Because otherwise, you just have bloated tech stacks. I think one of the number one issues on all SaaS companies is utilization of the tool. And I think a lot of it actually comes back to some of the lack of resources enablement has had to help actually enable the orgs on how to use the tools.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. One of the things that we're actually working on right now is what we're calling a day in the life. And, we have so many tools. So 6th Sense, Vidyard, Chili Piper, when are you supposed to be using these throughout your sales process? Because it can get confusing. There's too much in there. And so we're actually building out kind of a more 100-foot view of like, what does that day look like? And when, at what point should you be using this tool versus this tool? When do you send through outreach versus just going to your Gmail? Because I think it, again, like I think you said it perfectly, Kevin, like our role has expanded so much into not just how do you talk about the product and what you're selling, but the entire process.
So I'm a very visual person, and I always think of it as a map of our sales funnel and where each tool's core benefits fit in. And so from there, it's really easy to identify any gaps that might exist. If I see a massive gap on a certain step, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe we should look at tools to address this need. At the same time, it's also equally important to have kind of a culture of openness amongst your team and get regular feedback from sales on their workflow and listen to where they might be stuck, because that's often a great place for a technology to jump in. In terms of kind of going about this process, I like discovering the tools organically. So I'm on like Product Hunt all the time, trying to see what's new. I search tech stack on LinkedIn all the time and see what people are posting about. I'm in a few different Slack groups and sales enablement. So I'll just kind of see what's out there, what people are using. But I have to say what was kind of interesting about Vidyard is what initially led me to their product was actually their content. So they had a bunch of really great articles on micro demos for the tech role that I was in at the time. And I just found their content so compelling. And then I didn't realize that their product had a solution for a problem I didn't realize I had. So really cool to kind of discover that tool through their content organically like that.
I think it's really key what she mentioned there too, of trying to stay on top of what's new. And like, this is me speaking as a sales leader. By the time something gets popular, it's almost too late. Like if you're trying to have massive impact either across your org or pipeline generation or closing, like once something becomes mainstream, the big impact isn't always there anymore. And so staying on top of what's new, I think is really important. And it's really cool to hear that Alex is doing that in enablement, because you don't actually hear that all the time, that enablement is like seeking out, like knows their sales team well enough or knows their CS team well enough to go, what's out there that kind of is in this genre. So that's a really cool point, Alex. That was cool to hear.
Oh, thanks.
Absolutely. You have to kind of like stay at the forefront of what's going on in the industry, because like enablement ends up not only like implementing the tools, but also the forefront of the knowledge share within the organization. I also like what you said about content. I think a lot of times people take that content as a brand reflection. So it's interesting how our minds like go to those companies that we identify with the content with so much. And I think Vidyard is a company that, you know, obviously does a really good job at that.
If I think about what you should spend, if I think about, okay, you have a CRM, right? So depending on which CRM you use, 25 to 75-ish per seat there, maybe more, maybe less. A coaching tool, right? I think that's foundational. So that's probably going to run you about 50 to 100, depending on the one that you use. Now we're about 200. A sales process tool, right? Like an Outreach, a SalesLoft, a Groove, a Zant. So there's probably another 100 there. So now we're sitting about 250 to 300. A data tool, that's where the price really starts to vary, right? Like, you know, if you're going after thousands of leads or, you know, a couple hundred leads enterprise or not, like I think the sweet spot more often than not tends to be around that 500-ish per month that I think is foundational, that I think companies should build into their op plans and their budget plans is the foundational things in there. Right. So like that's I think like the sweet spot of like, if you're not spending that, you're actually probably missing out on revenue.
I've been wanting to document this, naturally being enablement, love process and documentation, but the formula that I found most successful after a few launches now under my belt is separate plans for external using the product, meaning the actual tech side, the admin and implementation from that standpoint. External, we really start early and kind of tease the solution. I always think of it like dropping an album, like following an artist on Instagram and they're going to drop an album. So what does that process look like? So kind of random as a reference, but it's definitely worked for us. So announcing on our all hands to generate some buzz. Then we'll send out like expression of interest email to the reps and see who wants to volunteer to be part of a pilot group of users. From there, we'll really encourage the pilot group, once they're comfortable, to start sharing their small victories in a Teams group, getting people hyped up pretty early on, like, oh, hey, the success that they're having, and I want to replicate that. And then we'll usually the week before launch start like a whole hype video campaign where each day we're dropping a vidyard with different small victories that people are talking about, or even just something really fun and engaging about 10 reasons why you're going to love Gong or whatever it might be. And then we'll really split up the training into the admin and navigation day, where it's like, okay, just get signed in, get used to the tool, and then have a homework assignment that's really basic, but still just something that can be a takeaway. And then the next day, or potentially skip a day and then do another one, we would have more of the actual use case and workflow. So we're not cramming everything into a 30-minute or an hour session. We're kind of spacing it out and then giving appropriate homework assignments so that they can get used to the tool and have the time to really get their bearings.
So critical. I mean, every time you roll out a new piece of technology, you put all of this energy and effort into training the team that's already there, that I think sometimes you kind of forget all that effort that you put into that when you're onboarding new people. But truly, you still have to go through a lot of the same process and redo that. I think it's easy sometimes in onboarding to just be like, oh, here's your tool set it up, and you teach them how to set it up. But if you're not properly teaching them how to effectively use the tools and going really through the same process you did, making sure that their managers are also helping them, and all of the things that Kevin and Alex have been talking about when you bring on new tools, you have to have that same experience in onboarding, which is difficult to replicate, but it's super important, or else you're gonna see ramp time suffer, and you're gonna see adoption of those tools suffer as well.
It depends on the tool, right? Like, so it does depend on the tool, but at the core of it, you can look at login information. Like, are they even logging into it? And then again, part of enablement actually is doing a good job of setting what the standard is, right? So if it's a video tool like Video, how many videos are they supposed to be sending out on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? If it's a chili piper, how many calendar invites, how many meetings seem to be getting booked from it? Sendoso, how many packages are they sending? SalesLoft, outreach, how many emails? So it's like, depends on the tool, but even to the data tool, how many leads are they pulling? So I think that's a very important part of setting up the tools. Also, what are the utilization expectations?